All right, 34, death penalty. Replace the death penalty with life without parole is basically what it comes down to. It also throws in requiring murderers to work to pay restitution while they're in prison for life, and tells the legislature they got to spend $100 million a year to fund specifically going after unsolved murders and rapes. So the yes argument says this will save $130 million a year, so that's what funds that $100 million extra going into solving unsolved homicides and rapes. It avoids the mistaken execution of innocent people because the justice system, as good as it is not perfect, and they do demonstrably occasionally make mistakes, which when someone goes to prison and then eventually gets exonerated and gets released, that's kind of a bummer. But when someone gets executed and then gets exonerated, you can't give them the rest of their life back. The special death row holding in the prison system is on average 20 years. It's extraordinarily expensive, and those resources would be better used actually solving crimes. The key no argument is only the worst of the worst get the death penalty. And basically, they deserve to be executed, so why are we having this conversation? The last time the death penalty was rescinded, killers were released to kill again, and that the cost, this $130 million in savings, is not really true because they don't like the way the numbers, they say that if you count the numbers differently, you get much, much less in savings. So, the death penalty in California is not a great success. At least in terms of when you look at how it works. It takes, on average, 20 years a person spends on death row. That's a long time on death row. We only average one execution every 1.5 years, which, I mean, not that we want more executions, but there's a lot of people on death row. It's a very slow-moving process. And it costs $90,000 a year more for each death row inmate. That's more than, so if you got someone who committed a homicide who's in for life, and he's in the regular prison system compared to someone on death row, it's a $90,000 difference. So it's $90,000 more than the already high cost of having anybody in prison. 140 people on death row in the United States in the last 10 years have been exonerated, mostly due to improvements in forensic science, a lot of it being genetic. Some other technologies have allowed re-examining of evidence that prove these people were innocent. So we know the system's not perfect. And this has always been my beef. I'm as vengeance-filled as anybody. And there's lots of people who I see on trial for murder who I think should be whacked. But I also know that the system occasionally convicts innocent people. And I just can't see putting people to death unless you have a perfect system. Because you will inevitably kill innocent people. And that seems like a pretty high level of kind of community moral offense compared to locking somebody up for a long time who's innocent, who at least you might eventually, through this new technology, discover they're innocent and let them have the rest of their lives back. So, death's permanent. The story that last time there was no death penalty, these killers got released, is basically a lie, and the press has had a field day with it because the No campaign based their ads on that. What happened is in '72 the Supreme Court overturned our death penalty because of the way it was structured. It took us 6 years to rewrite our death penalty and get it reinstated. During that period, there was no life without parole sentence in California. You could not, the judges could not give somebody life. So people who were on death row and had been there for 20 or 30 years, which surpassed the normal sentence for homicide, and since there was no life sentence, had to be released at that time. And a number of them were, and one of them murdered his parents when he got out. So there was one very tragic consequence. None of that is relevant now because we have life without parole. And this is a constitutional requirement that these people get life without parole. So nobody gets released. There is no legal way whatsoever anybody gets released under this change. And so, for me, the fact that the system's imperfect and the money, it costs so much to do, when Kern Tax was debating this, what I thought was hilarious when somebody said, this wouldn't change anything because it's not like we actually have a death penalty that's real in California anyway. The vast majority of these people wind up serving essentially life without parole because we can't ever get around to executing them. This would just save us all that money of having trials for 20 or 30 years and just put them in prison for life and be done with it. I think that's a pretty compelling argument. It's much cheaper, it's much more effective. It's what we really currently do. And we would just lose the occasional satisfaction of executing somebody who really deserves it, which is a pretty small satisfaction, I think, compared to locking them up for life.
So you're saying that the legal fees of the automatic appeal processes exceed the cost of keeping those people in prison?
No, those aren't even counted. That $90,000 is just the cost of all of their special treatment. They have to be kept isolated, separate. They have to receive, they have to have a lawyer full-time. It doesn't include the actual court and trial costs, but it does include their legal representation. So their health care, their legal representation.
So if you add the court costs,
it would be even more. Right. Though there's some argument there because people who get life also appeal their cases.